What we weren't prepared for, I think, in some ways, was the level of violence in terms of enforcing the curfew. Amnesty International Kenya has, with a number of organizations, been monitoring and acting on several cases. And in many cases, what we found is that a misdemeanor like not wearing a mask or not staying home during curfew was enough to have several people, assaulted, beaten, and in some cases shot, in the streets of some of the urban settlements across Nairobi, Mombasa, and other places. So I think there's been real concern to the degree of violence that we've seen. But it's not just state violence; it's also civil violence or citizens' violence. We've seen 40% increases in sexual and gender-based violence from intimate partners as well. Mental health is really being tested at this time, and I think for many of us, we are essentially seeing the universal vaccination program as being probably the most important game changer, not just in terms of protecting the right to health, but also in opening up the economy, and lastly, in ensuring that we don't go into an election season with COVID-19 public health guidelines that would allow for, weaponization of different parts of the government against the opposition. So I think these are some of the concerns around this area. And I think one of the reasons I'm in Washington at the moment is really to raise the flag, the red flag, at the negative consequences of global vaccine apartheid. The idea that in some parts of the world, people have had 2 jabs, they're looking at their 3rd booster, and in many parts of Africa, people are really yet to get the 1st jab. I think Kenya at the moment only has 4% immunity, for countries like the US with up to 50%, 70% in some states, this is just really shocking and needs to be called out. And I think the first thing we have to do is demand that the richer countries lift the waiver, lift the restrictions on intellectual property rights for the production of generic vaccines, so that countries like Kenya, like South Africa, that have the capacity to domestically manufacture can do so.
That would be great. And just finally on that issue, would it be considered a human rights issue? Those politicians, those officials who have been accused of actually enriching themselves from COVID-19 funds, they have been stealing, they have been misappropriating funds, whether it is at the central government level or even county government level.
No, it is. It's a human rights violation. It's also an affront to the chapter in our constitution, which is the leadership and integrity chapter, that forbids public servants or state officers from enriching themselves using public resources. So it's very clearly a case. And sadly, pandemic profiteering and what we call in Kenya coronapreneurs, people who made large amounts of money essentially from inflating the costs of protective personal equipment, but also the vaccines, I think, and the equipment around the vaccination program. That many of those people, essentially were not only just endangering the population, but they were essentially holding up the vaccination effort. And I think we have kept a very strong line that government must prosecute people involved in providing inflated goods and services, because ultimately they are profiting from a pandemic.